Thank you so much for attending the League of Women Voters of Seattle-King County First Thursday Forum. My name's Chelsea Jordan. I'm the Voter Service Co-Chair, so I just want to welcome you guys all back to the new league year. We have a lot coming up this election season, so keep an eye out on the website, seattlelwv.org, and the email newsletters. We've got a voter registration coming up at the Seattle Central Library on September 24th, if anyone wants to volunteer for that. We're also going to be doing our annual ballots and baristas on October 22nd, so let us know if you want to sign up to be a facilitator or just stop by to have a conversation on ballot measures. Today, our guest speaker is Kendall Hodson, Chief of Staff for King County Elections, and she's going to speak with us about and get us up to speed on some recent changes and reforms on local election laws and voting reforms. She will be taking periodic questions throughout her talk, so just wait till she lets us know that it's time and raise your hand and we'll bring you out a mic. So please give a hand for Kendall.
Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you all for having me tonight. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the work that you do. I've got about 65 permanent staff, which may seem like a lot, but they've got lots of things to do throughout the year. So we really count on organizations like yours to get out the word, to remind people to vote, to get them registered, to do all those things. So we're very grateful to you guys. Let's get started. As Chelsea said, I'm Kendall Hodson. I'm the Chief of Staff at King County Elections. I've been with King County for about 10 years now, and I've been with King County Elections since 2016. That was when our director, Julie Wise, who was elected, took office. She's fantastic. Some of you, I think, have had the opportunity to meet her. And certainly if you come for a tour, as some of you have done as well, you can have her do that as well for you. I'm going to cover a couple things today. Seeing as this is the League of Women Voters, I felt like I didn't need to go too in-depth about elections in general. For some audiences, I'm like, there are 4 elections a year. They are all important. We vote by mail in Washington State, but I feel like we're going to skip all that with this audience. So I'm going to just give you a couple of quick overview pieces on King County elections. Then we're going to talk really a lot about the recent laws and some of the changes ahead. And then, what's ahead, I guess. But we're going to start, this is maybe a little cheesy, but I couldn't help myself, you guys. We have a bunch of new fun things that we have procured with our brand name on it. So we're going to start with a little trivia. And we'll see what everyone knows. Some of these are a little bit tough. The first one is, what percentage of Seattle voters live within 1 mile of a ballot drop box? Any guesses? I know it's a wild guess. Just guess.
50%.
35 back there? What did you say? 55. Keep guessing. We're gonna call 65 pretty close. It's actually 68.7% of Seattle voters now live within a mile of a drop box. So I've got a vote tote bag, I have a coffee mug, and I've got a tumbler with our vote logo on it.
I think the
Tumbler, great choice. I'm so excited about these, you guys. I just couldn't help myself. All right. Got 2 more here. The next one is, what was the average age of voters in the primary election? That was kind of a groan, you guys.
45, 42, 52.
Did I hear 55? 52? I heard a 54? Anybody? We'll go with 52. It's actually 55. But you're pretty close. Toast? Coffee? Yeah, right? My closet is exploding with tote bags.
55% of what?
Sorry, 55 was the average age of voters in the primary election. We are trying to do more work around data analysis, so some of the things that we're starting to look at a little bit. And then, what was the first year King County exceeded 1 million ballots returned? 2016? Yeah, absolutely. 2016. Tote bag. Yeah. What was really amazing is actually in 2018, just last year, we had almost 1 million returned in the midterm election. So we had 981,000 ballots come back that last year for 76% turnout, which is absolutely amazing for a midterm election. All right, we'll get into more details now. So King County Elections has been vote by mail since 2009. We've got 1.3 million voters. That's actually about a third of voters in Washington state. We can still say that we are the largest county in the nation to vote entirely by mail, but with with California going to vote by mail, that may change a little bit in the coming years. But for now, we're still the largest county in the country to vote entirely by mail. We do elections for over 190 different jurisdictions. So this surprises a lot of folks from the East Coast especially, because they often see their local jurisdictions carrying out their own elections. We do everything. We do all the cities, we do all the school boards, all the fire districts, we have water districts, we have a cemetery district on Vashon Island. There are lots of different types of districts, more than I had any idea existed. And we run elections for all of them. And then finally, we provide materials in 5 languages, English, Spanish, Korean, Vietnamese, and Chinese. Korean and Spanish were the most recent. We added those in 2016. I like to just kind of touch on what our philosophy is. I think across Washington state and across the country, a lot of organizations feel like their job is just to conduct elections, and that's it. And of course, our mission is to conduct fair, accurate elections 100%. But our vision really is to be the most inclusive provider of elections. So our goal is really to remove barriers to voting. So yes, we are absolutely doing accurate, secure ballot counting, but we're also thinking every single day about how do we make it easier, more convenient, and engage more people in the voting process. So that's really kind of our orientation toward our work. So just something to keep in mind as we kind of keep talking here. Any general questions so far just on kind of our operations, King County elections, elections in general, before I start talking about new laws?
I'd like to ask about the drop-off box.
Yeah, go ahead.
Start putting them around town.
Great question. So it's varied over the years. When Julie took office in 2016, we had 10 drop boxes. We're actually up to almost 70. We're at 68 right now. So we got up to about 43 for that 2016 presidential election, and then we've added, 15 to 20-ish each year after, not 10 to 15 each year after that. So we're continuing to add. It is a program that has grown very quickly. So one of the challenges, we have to have 2 people at 8 p.m. on every election night to close that box. So, you're at 140 people and some more than that, because locations like Ballard need 8 people to close the box. So before we go too much higher than that, we need to figure out how to get a sustainable staffing model. Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
Oh, I just wanted to say that the fact that we are not hearing anything about the fact that we're not hearing anything about problems with voting in this area is a huge tribute to you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. I will say I'm new to this organization compared to some of the staff who have been there for many, many years, but it was amazing to me when I came in how much care goes into counting every single ballot. And I think that we are lucky to have legislators in Olympia who have really passed some progressive policies around voting, and I think vote by mail we love. We think it's the most secure way to do things. We think it's the most accurate way to do things. When we transitioned, we're managing 700 polling locations and 6,000 to 7,000 staff on election day. Just from a risk management perspective, I can't even imagine what that was like to try to manage all of those locations. And at this point, every single ballot we count is counted in about 400 square feet on the second floor of our building. So it gives us so much more control, which is great. All right, should we talk about new laws? Keep asking questions as we go, it's great. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of them. This is the list, but if there are others that you've heard about that you'd like to hear about, definitely let me know. The first one that we are probably most excited about is same-day registration. We have wanted this for a while. When we look across the country and see highest turnout states, a lot of them have the common theme of same-day registration. So we used to have a 29-day deadline to register either online or by mail. That's now an 8-day deadline. So you can go online up to 8 days before Election Day, register online. You can be out collecting voter registrations up until 8 days before the election, which is fantastic. Because what we found is a lot of voters, they aren't even thinking about the election a month out. At that point, it's too early. So this was a huge change. And then prior to the law change, you had until 8 days before to register in person at the auditor's office. Now you have until 8 p.m. on election night. So you can come in, never been registered before in Washington State, and you can walk into our office or one of our vote centers, and you can register and vote at that same time up until 8 p.m. on election night. So this was a really big deal. We were super excited about this. One of the things that came with the law that I think is also really good is a requirement for vote centers. We are technically only required to have a vote center in every city over 100,000 people in presidential elections. Our perspective really is that our voters do best, actually Allison and I were just talking about this, when you have a location like this forum at the same place over and over again, people get used to it. They understand where it is. So our feeling really is that we want to be open for every primary and every general election at these same locations for our vote centers, so people get used to going there. So we're still kind of figuring out the exact locations, but we did open 5 in the past primary election. Of course, our headquarters in Renton. We've got our spot at the King County Administration Building that we're at year-round, and then we opened one in Bellevue, Federal Way, and Kenmore City Hall. It went really very well. We saw about 830 people through the doors that we helped, and we registered 270 brand new people. Not a huge number, but for an odd year primary election, we were pretty happy with it, and it gave us a good opportunity to try out those new processes and work through a lot of those things. So that went really well. Go ahead.
What happens at a vote center?
Yeah, great question. So a couple things can happen. One, you can walk in and register to vote up until election day or on election day. They also serve as our accessible vote centers. So for voters with disabilities who might want an audio ballot, who might want a touchpad, who might want to use a touch screen to make the font size larger or the contrast different, who might want to bring in their Braille adaptive device to plug into the machine. You can do all those things at the vote centers as well. So often what we frankly see people coming in most often is we see a lot of people who just miss polling places, so they come in because they miss getting to do that. We also see a lot of people come in to get a replacement ballot. They can actually do that online, but a lot of people maybe don't realize that or just prefer to come in person. So they'll walk in and just say, hey, I lost my ballot, can I get another one?
How many days before the election do those vote centers open?
Great question. So the one in Renton and the one in Seattle open as soon as we mail ballots. So about 20 days before the election, those ones are open. For the other ones, we really open at that 8 or 9 day window kind of when in-person registration starts, because that's really when we start to see traffic pick up. All right. Another new law, we're also very excited about this. I hope you all are excited about this because I do know you do some registration work in high schools, is pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. What we have seen over the years is so many kids are going to get their license at the DMV or the DOL, and they're 16 and they don't go back for a number of years. So we miss that opportunity to get them into the system. We see voter registration drives going on in high schools, and you're only capturing a portion of the seniors who are actually eligible to vote. So we were really excited about this one as well. This one is in effect now. We are seeing registrations for 16 and 17-year-olds. The 2 little graphics I have here is actually a campaign we are running right now for back to school. So these ads are actually being served to all those kids' phones, targeting kind of the high school areas. So, when they're out of class, when they're checking their phone, they're looking on YouTube, they're going to be seeing pre-register, get registered, things like that. And then they'll automatically get a ballot as soon as they turn 18.
I just thought you'd like to know that the Parent-Teacher-Student Association at Roosevelt High School has already contacted the league asking for help, and they've scheduled 2 sessions.
That makes me so happy.
Yeah.
That's my student's high school. I did not know that, actually. I have a student at Roosevelt. So that's a great one. Another new law that the state legislature passed this past session is the Native American Voting Rights Act. Good news is, at least at King County, we were already in compliance and doing a lot of these things, but it's great to see that continuity happening statewide. So what this law does is it lets tribe members use their tribal ID for voter registration online. So that means that they don't need to have necessarily a Washington State ID or anything else to do that work. So they can go online with their tribal ID. The other thing it does is it lets them use a non-traditional address. This is something we also provide to our folks who are experiencing homelessness, where if you'd like to say, hey, I live at the cross streets of here and here, we'll go ahead and take that and use that to identify your precinct, and then we'll get your ballot to you whatever is easiest. So if that is at a shelter, if it's at a service provider, if it's general delivery at the post office, we'll do whatever works best for that voter. Might be a friend's house, could be any number of places where we mail it, but what we'll do is use a non-traditional address to get that voter registered. And then the other thing it does is require that auditors place a ballot drop box on tribal land if the tribe requests it. And in King County already, we do have one at the Muckleshoot Reservation. We love it, it's great, but this will be good for the other counties across the state who maybe haven't gone to do that yet. So that's a new one that we're excited about as well. This one there may be lots of questions for. So we have a new presidential primary date. There was a lot of conversation about this in Olympia this past session. It will be on the second Tuesday in March, March 10th, which is, we think, good news. It had been in May most recently, where I think a lot of people felt like it was maybe not super relevant at that point. You do still have to declare a party preference. This was one of the things there was a lot of conversation about. I can tell you that certainly our staff and our phone bank dread the presidential primary because Washington voters despise declaring a party, which I completely appreciate. So we get many, many calls every election saying, why do I have to declare a party? I don't want to declare a party. That is still the case for this election. You will have on that outside envelope where you normally sign your declaration, there will be a party declaration. You do have to mark, it's on the outside. I know that also is very offensive to people sometimes. You do have to pick a party and then you have to vote for that particular column on your ballot. We don't know exactly what everything will look like yet, but that it will feel like it did last time. And that is part of your record for about 60 days. It doesn't stay on your voter's record. We do not keep a party preference in Washington state. You don't register with one, but it's there for 60 days. And the reality is, everyone requests that information, so it is out there in the world as soon as it happens. So we definitely have voters who do not vote in that election because they don't want that out in the world that they declared a party for the presidential primary. Yeah,
So how many parties are there listed?
There'll be just the Republican and the Democratic primaries.
Oh, you can't do independent?
You can't do independent on this one. There is an option that I believe they can choose to allow, which is to say that you want your delegates unaffiliated for that party, but you still have to declare that party to vote in that particular race. So one thing that's confusing that we try to explain to people sometimes is it is a party election. It is an election we are running for the party. I think it really feels weird in Washington because we're so used to a top two primary and a primary that happens in August. This is really a fundamentally different creature. It's the only thing on the ballot. It is for the parties that we do this. So I guess the good news is that both parties are planning to use the results. So I think that will hopefully make some people feel a little better than last time as well. Any more questions on that one?
Do the parties pay for that, or is it publicly funded?
Washington State pays for that. So the Secretary of State's office pays for that out of state funds. So we actually do get reimbursed for everything, but as taxpayers, I certainly don't see a difference between which one's which. So yeah. Another one, prepaid postage statewide is another law that passed this past session. We were really pleased to see that happen. I think we felt responsible and proud of that particular piece. In King County, we had piloted prepaid postage in 2017 for some smaller elections to make sure it would work operationally. And then Julie was like, this is working, this is the right thing to do. We actually saw some higher turnout in those local elections and those small jurisdictions. So we worked with our county council, who were amazing partners, and said, we're doing it at King County, and I'm sorry if nobody else likes it, but we think it's the right thing to do. It got a little contentious, but I think the state ultimately came around and everyone felt like this is a good thing to do for our voters. So we were really pleased to see that pass and to be funded statewide. So no matter where you live, you will have your postage paid this election. I just think this is always a little bit interesting. As we have tried to increase both drop boxes and gone to prepaid postage, you can see that voter behavior changes. What I take away from that is voters like having choices. So depending on what options you give them, they're going to pick the option that works best for them. So as I mentioned earlier, we had just 10 drop boxes in that prior to 2016 year. We saw about 18 to 20% of ballots typically coming back through drop boxes. When we increased them pretty dramatically, we saw it bump up in 2016 to almost half and half. We saw 180,000 ballots come back on election day just through drop boxes, which was absolutely astounding. And then as we've added prepaid postage, you can kind of see in 2018, people have swung back to wanting to mail their ballot, which is perfectly fine. We could really not care. We think both are really important. A lot of people, it's convenient to drop in their mailbox. For other voters, especially those who wait till the last minute, that Dropbox is really the right choice on Monday or Tuesday. At that point, we really have switched our messaging to say, if it's at this point in the election, you're safest to put in a Dropbox because that might not get postmarked depending on the service in your area. So that's been, I think, really great to see.
Kendall?
Yeah.
About what percentage of ballots do you see come back postmarked late and therefore not able to be counted?
A depressing number. Usually I want to say it was probably 4,000 or 5,000 in the last election. It's more than you would think. Usually everything that comes in Wednesday is on time, of course, but then we see it, 4,000 to 8,000 at least come back late in bigger elections.
Are they opened up?
Nope. No. Well, they're not tossed, but we keep everything. But yeah. We have to, so for a federal election, we retain everything for 22 months, just in case there is ever an issue or something to go back to. So that's one of the things we like about Washington's laws is that there's a paper trail and we keep everything. Literally, we keep that security sleeve, we keep everything that comes back, and we have to for 22 months after the election. But yeah, we check the postmarks every single day, and those just get stored, set aside, and then we tell those voters we're really sorry it was too late.
Do you lock the Dropbox? Because I look at it at the bus stop in West Seattle and wonder, are there any ballots in there late?
Yeah, so the Dropboxes all get locked right at 8 p.m. on election night, and if you have been there, I know no one in this room would wait till the last minute, I'm sure. If you are ever there at 8 p.m. on election night, our staff are militant about it. So they have an atomic clock on top of the Dropbox. It is the law. They have to be locked at 8 p.m. So our staff are standing there. It's always at least 2, depending on how busy the box is. They are calling out 30 seconds left. They're calling out 10 seconds left. They're yelling at the people who are running like, hurry, please come, get your ballot, and I have to lock the box at 8 p.m. And then they lock it right at 8 p.m. Yeah. And then they stayed locked until, we only open them up again when the election period starts, when ballots are mailed. Yeah, it's very depressing. It's actually, we tried a volunteer program to help staff our Dropboxes this year just with county employees in case they wanted to maybe after work go help close a Dropbox. We got amazing feedback. They loved doing it because our voters are so appreciative and it's super fun. The only negative feedback that we got was, it was so depressing because people were late and it really upset me. And I was like, I hear you. I totally understand. All right. Any other Dropbox questions? Oh. You want to wait for the microphone for 1 minute, sorry.
So the 4,000 that don't get counted, do you contact those voters?
We do. We contact all
okay.
of those voters. Really, no matter what is happening with your ballot, we're going to let you know. So if your signature was challenged, we'll let you know. We actually also, if your signature looks like it is getting further away, but we said, yes, this looks good, we will actually send you a letter saying it looks like this is getting a little further away from the one we have on file. Can you send us an updated one? Because we'll keep as many as we want on file. Julie actually got one from herself that I was carrying around for a while because it was my highlight when I was doing tours, is to show everyone the letter she got from herself with the signature on it, saying that her signature was looking a little bit off. But yes, for anyone who has a ballot that is too late, we send them a letter saying, hey, we're really sorry, we couldn't count this. It was postmarked too late or something along those lines, and then make some suggestions on how they could in the future. And our staff actually spend a lot of time going back and forth with people who say, it couldn't have been, I put it in the mail this date, and we completely empathize, but we will send them the actual picture of their ballot with the postmark saying, we're really sorry, we would love to count this, we just legally can't. Oh, one more up here.
This is a technical question, but if you send them a letter when you have a question about their ballot, do we really need to be getting the email address and the phone number, because they're kind of hesitant about that?
So I think you're asking for registration.
On the voting registration form.
Yes, no, great question. We love to have as many ways to contact people as possible. It's obviously their preference, but if we challenge their signature, for example, we will send them the letter, but we will also call them and we will email them, because sometimes that's the faster way to get a hold of them. So we like to have as many ways as possible to get a hold of people. We actually have done a little bit of survey work too that I think has been pretty well received. for Dropbox locations. So we actually track where you returned your ballot to which Dropbox, if you brought it back to a Dropbox. And that we've done for boxes like Ballard, for example, that are just so busy, is take a look at where people are coming from to go to Ballard. So our staff will actually map that and look at, are there holes that people are coming from that maybe we need a Dropbox in that location? And then we actually, for very targeted groups, have sent a little survey to their email saying, hey, we saw you dropped it at this location. Would any of these other ones have been better for you? And it's a great way for us to gather data about where we would put drop boxes in the future. So it's really helpful. I think this might be I think this is the final one of new laws. So another law that passed this past session was actually notification of voting rights. So one of the things we hear the most about at King County elections in terms of confusion that you all probably do as well is, I have a felony conviction, can I vote? And I think it's because, one, our law is a little bit confusing. Also, across the country, the laws are so different on this particular issue, and there's a lot of media and attention around it. So we have voters. I was listening to a story by one of our community partners the other day where they were at a community event, and a gentleman came up, and he had been out of jail for 27 years, and he had no idea he could register to vote, and he was so excited. And it's very exciting he is, but also sad that he missed 27 years of having his voice heard. So we hear a lot of confusion about this. I think we see this as really the first step, but what they did pass last year was a requirement that the Department of Corrections notify people that their rights are automatically restored after they are released, and give them information about how to register to vote, including a form. So at a minimum, we actually have the DOC contacting people, letting them know affirmatively, your rights are restored, and here's how the process looks. I'm going to talk about it a little more later, but we would actually like to see that go a step further. We would like people who are currently on community custody to actually have full enfranchisement as well, to one, because we think that's the right thing to do, but also because it will make communicating with people much, much easier. Yeah, go ahead.
So if the person was registered to vote before they were convicted of this felony, they still have to re-register?
They do have to register again, yes. Good question. I threw this in there because we talk about this sometimes in voter registration trainings. So restoration of rights, what we typically tell the people who want to register is, you should really check with the DOC of whether or not you're under DOC authority. It's the best way to do it. And then all you need to do is fill out a new form and you're good to go. Yeah, go ahead.
Out of curiosity, approximately how many people have you served in this capacity?
I'm sorry, in which capacity?
About how many people have you given restored rights to?
Oh, that's a great question. I have no idea. It's not something we ask when we're
Is
doing
it
voter
dozens,
registration.
hundreds?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And a bill that I'll talk about in a little bit that actually would grant voting rights to people who are on community custody would probably enfranchise about 10,000 people in Washington State. Yeah, so those are people who are still under the authority of the DOC, but they're not actually in jail. They're under probation, effectively. I hate to get into this terminology because it confuses me a little bit, but they are still kind of doing part of their sentence, and they are actually not eligible to vote in some cases. So it would be about 10,000 people that a bill that we're really excited about in Olympia would enfranchise.
How about the people who come out of prison, which I guess everybody does, with huge debts?
That's a good question. So I don't know how many years ago it was, but quite a few, I want to say at least 10, where your payment of your fines is no longer conditioned to being able to register to vote. Yeah, so that was good news. That's been the case for a little while.
People who have had to make reparations to the victims and they've had this amount of money, and it's like, well, then I can't vote. But that's no longer.
That is no longer the case.
Wow.
I don't know what year that was because it was
That's
before
absolutely
my time,
fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that is definitely not the case in a lot of states. I think we would like to see Washington State go a little further, but we are definitely, I think, in the more progressive set of states on that front. Oh, yes, it is statewide. Yeah, the question was if that was statewide. It is statewide.
But other states are way behind, right, in these kind of things?
It's a great question. Yeah, other states are very different. There's huge variability, and I think that's why there's so much confusion about this when you're out in the field. I think Florida got a lot of attention because they just passed an initiative. They were one of, I think, 3 states where you were permanently disenfranchised if you had a felony conviction. So I think maybe a third of African American men in Florida for a while were actually disenfranchised. So yeah, there's a whole spectrum. There are, I believe, 2 states. Vermont is one of them. I can't remember the other one right now. Maine, is it Maine? That's what I was thinking too. Who actually, your felony conviction, even if you are currently incarcerated, does not prohibit you from voting.
The notification, that would be to people who were serving time in Washington State. I mean, you wouldn't know about the others.
Correct.
So if somebody moved here from Alabama, and so in other words, we still need to do outreach. We can't depend on the notification.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the notification is just one piece. We do have,
Yeah.
I'll talk a little bit about our voter education fund, but we do have a couple community partners who are doing work in jails, actually working with folks, letting them know, especially for those who are maybe awaiting trial. A lot of the folks, especially in the King County Jail, are awaiting trial. They're in there for a misdemeanor. They're absolutely still eligible to get their ballot. So they're working with those folks to either get them registered or to figure out what arrangements need to be made so they can actually get their ballot and vote it. Yeah, go ahead.
Maine had same-day registration 32 years ago when I lived there.
Of course.
So what states are ahead of us that you want to emulate? Is that the right word?
That's a
Copy.
great question. So we spend a lot of time looking to Oregon and Colorado as our other kind of vote-by-mail peers. So there are some things that we would like to see Washington do compared to them. I will say we do have automatic voter registration. I don't talk a whole lot about it in this presentation just because it is not real robust automatic voter registration because of the way our DOL works. States like Oregon have a lot more people registered automatically because of the way their licensing process works. So in Oregon, my understanding, and I am not an expert in the DOL processes of our state, let alone any other one, is that you are either, if you are a citizen, you are getting one type of driver's license. If you are a non-citizen, you're getting a different type of driver's license, full stop. And if you are a citizen, you are registered. In Washington, our enhanced driver's license is optional. So it's really just for people who are choosing to pay that extra fee to go through that process. So we see a much smaller number of people in Washington taking advantage of that. So I don't know what that would look like, but Oregon is definitely ahead of us, I think, on that particular front. I think Colorado is ahead of us in some petition gathering pieces. They have this really cool technology, you guys, where you can go out and do petitions and signature gathering electronically. So you can log into the app and it will actually verify whether or not that person is eligible to sign on that particular petition and then sign electronically, which makes it much easier on people who are gathering signatures for a ballot measure, as well as on us when we are verifying signatures, because right now we recommend folks get at least 20% more than what's required because so many end up not being in that district or not eligible or things like that. But yeah, Maiden's a great example. The other things we're looking around at are ranked choice voting. We hear a lot about that we are certainly exploring. I think our position is ranked choice voting. I think there are really mixed feelings about that, but certainly there are some groups that are really interested in that as a way to get voters more engaged. Certainly, I think for several elections now, people have felt like, well, I need to just vote for this person because a person I really like doesn't have a prayer of getting elected. And I think ranked choice voting is one way to kind of alleviate that. So we are kind of looking around at other places that are maybe doing that. So we'll see. I will say I do think Washington's ahead of a lot of states, so we're in a good place. Yeah, go ahead.
This was something you said a couple of minutes ago. The idea that somebody could sign a petition, that's not about voting, but signing petitions, then the person who gets them to sign online, whose line is this? Their own cell phone or something?
So I don't know a ton about what Denver is using and what it actually looks like in practice, but my understanding is there's an app that one would log into through some sort of a tablet most likely, or even you could just be checking in the field to make sure people are registered voters, and then they would do it electronically.
So, but electronically through, you're saying, through someone else's thing? In other words, they'd say, well, sign here.
Through an application that the
But not my own application.
No, no, no,
Theirs.
it's-
But then, if that's the case, they have to show an ID. And actually, when you sign a petition, normally you don't have to show an ID.
You wouldn't have to show but one in this case, is my understanding. Again, I don't know that much about Denver's technology. It's an app provided by the Elections Department at the City of Denver in Colorado, and they provide that to folks who are doing petition gathering. So they are using whatever that technology is, and what it will do is let them find you to say, okay, yes, this person is eligible to sign on this ballot measure that I'm collecting signatures for. They're in the right district, they're a registered voter. So what it's doing is it's pinging the voter registration database to confirm that you're eligible if you wanted to sign, and then you would sign next to that.
But they're actually, I guess they haven't found a lot of voter fraud, or a lot of petition fraud that way. Because anybody could do that on the internet, and they wouldn't know who it was. But I guess you could do that
all the
in a
signatures are still
paper one,
verified,
too.
so it's kind of the same way that it would work now. So we would still go through every single one of those and verify that voter's signature,
And they
just like they
check.
would now
Oh,
when they
they
bring
would
in
ver-
paper.
The signature. Oh.
Yeah. I've got a question in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
What is the process at our DOL in terms of motor voter?
I think certainly there's a human component to that. The way it works right now is if you go in for a just regular driver's license, one of the various questions you're asked is, would you like to register to vote? And you opt into that is the way that works. You all have, I haven't been real recently. Somebody may have been more recently than I have. For an enhanced driver's license, the way it works and the way automatic voter registration works is you are automatically registered unless you choose to opt out. So it's just kind of a difference in the way that they're phrasing it to you. The enhanced driver's license part and the automatic voter registration is the new part. Washington has had motor voter for quite a few years. We get about, I want to say, oh my gosh, I don't want to lie. I want to say 30% of our registrations through the Department of Licensing, 35%. So we get a lot through them.
Do they ask the 16 and 17-year-olds now, too?
They are starting to ask 16 and 17-year-olds. I actually had a briefing with the folks at DOL about what their process was to implement 16 and 17-year-old pre-registration. So I have not gone and checked, but they have changed their questions and trained their staff, is my understanding.
And it usually happens that somebody moves here and does it, and they're not on the rolls.
Yeah.
And then they happen to be asking Sam Reed, where's my voter registration? I didn't get one.
It's fair. All right. Any other laws you were hoping to hear about that you maybe heard about? Those were kind of the big ones that I thought were most interesting. And then I thought I'd spend a couple minutes talking about a few other things going on. Sound okay? All right. We talked a little bit about ballot drop boxes already. We are up to 68 across the county. We are now at, I told you the statistic earlier of how many voters are in Seattle are within a mile. We have almost 96% of King County voters live within 3 miles of a drop box. So that's something that we are kind of always seeking to improve to get more folks closer to those drop box locations. We have a new one going in the next couple of weeks at the Angle Lake Sound Transit Station. So we're really excited about that one. And then, maybe one or two more as we start to fill holes, and then we'll see kind of where we need to go from there. Our voter education fund, we're very excited about. We are in our fourth cycle. This is a program that we do with the Seattle Foundation. We invested with them almost $1 million in 39 community partners for the next 2-year cycle. And they do everything, a lot of things that you all do, frankly, but they do a lot of ballot parties in their communities. So our focus is really on historically disenfranchised communities, so those who maybe speak a language other than English at home, especially communities that are maybe Native, people with a felony conviction, people experiencing homelessness, our African American communities, our South King County community specifically, who have much lower registration and turnout rates. So this is a program that we're really excited about. We consider it probably the first in the country government philanthropic partnership, and our partners do amazing work. I just grabbed a couple of photos that I thought were exciting. You've got a lot of candidate forums that these folks do, and they do it specifically for their community. So you'll often see events that partners put on together where you have simultaneous translation happening in 6 different languages, and folks asking questions that impact their community. This is actually our most recent cohort at their orientation day at the bottom. And they do lots of fun things. They do social media campaigns. One of my favorites is the West Hill Community Association. They have really focused a lot of their work around their movie events. They show movies for the community on Friday nights in a big parking lot. Everyone brings their chairs and their kids and everything, and they show videos about voter registration, and they get people registered. It's a very cool program that they're doing. So that's one thing that was interesting. Security is a hot topic, as always. I think it will be even more so as we head into 2020. Something always on our mind. Just in the past year or two, we had the Department of Homeland Security come in and do an audit of our physical facility. For those of you who have been there, physical security is, I think, a surprising component for people because you hear so much about cybersecurity, but with every ballot being stored and processed in our building, a lot of it is how do you make sure that no one is getting into that building or getting into that secure tabulation room. So we have things like biometric access, using your fingerprint to get into certain spaces, using a badge to get in and off the floor anytime you're going onto the ballot processing floor. So the Homeland Security Department came in and kind of did a big assessment of that and gave us some recommendations. We also invited the state auditors cybersecurity team in, and they did a fair amount of cybersecurity testing and auditing of mainly our voter registration system, because that's the only one that is online, and our various kind of policies and protocols around that. So that was incredibly helpful. I think it gave us a lot of confidence heading into both the midterm and then into 2020, and we continue to work with both of those partners going forward. Has anyone seen any of our videos or our advertisements? Allison has. Has anyone else? Anyone seen any of our videos or advertisements? We've done a couple of ad campaigns recently. You'll see some of them on actually cable or network TV, not a ton because I don't have a huge advertising budget, but we do a few. We also do quite a bit of digital advertising because that is usually a little bit more cost effective. It also lets us really target certain communities that we are hoping to increase turnout in. So these are just a couple of examples of those recent ad campaigns. We'll run some more again. We actually, this is maybe counterintuitive, but do more advertising and promotional work in odd year elections. In midterm and presidential elections, turnout is really pretty high. We don't really, I mean, people are paying attention. We certainly do some, but it's more helpful reminders if you lost your ballot or, different things like that. It's the odd year elections where, we're forecasting about 40% turnout for this general election, which is just very depressing. So we really put a lot of our get out the vote efforts into odd years where we really want people to participate in those decisions that impact their local community. And then what's ahead? There's some elections ahead. I'm sure you all are tracking all of these. General election is February 5th. We then have 5 elections next year. So there'll be the regular February and April special elections. We have that March presidential primary, and then our August 4th regular primary, and then a presidential election next year. This will probably not surprise you, but we are already starting planning meetings in my department for the presidential election because we start preparing this far ahead. So we're already thinking about what security and traffic management and all of those things look like for that 2020 presidential election, because it will, I think, surely be record-breaking.
Is this unusual in the United States?
Yeah.
So many?
It is a little unusual. People, when they come here, are a little bit surprised that we have this many elections. A lot of times, some states are just every other year. This is a complete aside, but I'm going to tell you the story anyway. So one of the things we are dealing with right now, I don't know if you've heard about the Universal Postal Union in the news. It is the agreement that countries all over the world have around how they will take care of each other's mail. It is what lets us mail ballots to our overseas and service voters at not an exorbitant rate. And actually the administration has declared about a year ago that they plan to pull out of that agreement. You all groaned, I did not. And that would take effect actually this October. So where was I going with this? I don't know how I got here. So I'm not sure. So one thing we are doing is actually for our overseas and service voters, they can elect to receive their ballot electronically. We send them a link to our secure online ballot program. So we've really, about 60% of them do that right now, or about 2/3 actually. So we're really encouraging more of them to get their ballot that way to make sure that they actually get it. And then we'll have to figure it out if it actually happens in October about how they get it back to us. So we're kind of already trying to figure out what that looks like. I think the thinking behind that, sorry, this is where I was going with this particular answer, is they were not, when they've talked about elections and the impact for that, a lot of the federal organizations are like, well, we'll get other agreements in place before 2020. And a lot of the states were like, we have an election in odd years too that is very important, and we need to get those voters' ballots. So I think that there are a lot of places that are surprised even that we have an election in odd years for local folks.
So a question about that.
Yeah.
In terms of people in the armed services and also another group of folks, students, yeah. I mean, I know a student who did the online.
Yeah.
He was in Boston, so he was able
Yeah.
to do that. But I think in terms for our armed services, that's sometimes whether if they really register to vote wherever they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what we hear is that that's a very big deal to those folks. The survey feedback we get and the feedback we get is they're really grateful to be in a state like Washington where, one, you can register and your ballot actually counts as your registration. So they've actually had same-day registration for quite a while, and that they can access their ballot online from wherever they are is a really big deal, and they can send it back to us electronically. So
what's the process for that if you're overseas to actually make sure that you get a ballot and you can do it online?
to make sure you get it, you can just
register?
Yeah. So if you're overseas, you can register online just like anyone else, which is great. And then as part of the registration, you can declare that you are an overseas and service voter. We will consider you that in perpetuity. If you are a regular voter who happens to be overseas for an election, you can actually just go online and say, I'm an overseas voter. You can get your ballot that way, and then you are allowed to return it electronically to us. So you can actually declare at the time you're getting your ballot if that's what works for you.
I had an email just within the last week saying that it has been suggested by the present administration that perhaps the whole U.S. Postal Service might be privatized, and that's not related to voting, I know, but I thought you might have.
I had not heard that.
I don't know that would affect voting if it were privatized, but
Yeah, I have not heard that, but I think it's we consider the U.S. Postal Service a pretty important partner of ours, and I think that they do not mind that we are mailing 1.3 million ballots every election and getting many of them back. So I think any changes in the Postal Service, we actually keep a really close eye for postal strikes in other countries, because that is something that can affect our voters getting their ballots. So we work very, very closely with them. When we had the snowstorm in February, we were on a daily call with the post office about, were their carriers getting out? What was the status of things? What can we do? So I think any changes are very concerning to us.
So I'm just curious about the March 10th presidential primary.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean then the top two?
No,
what does it mean even?
Oh gosh, I'm a little out of my depth here.
In fact, because will the parties even have nominated their candidates?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
this is our.
Exactly. So
Yes,
in
I've
the
done the
last in
caucus.
2016, the Democrats used the results from the caucuses to figure out who their delegates were.
How could I forget?
Yeah. So this year, the Democrats will be using the results from the primary election.
It doesn't mean anything really. What? Well, it gives us an idea about who's ahead in our state.
My understanding is that the parties will use it to apportion their delegates to the national convention.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. On the ballot this fall, you will have an opportunity to vote on many, many, many things. There are 15 state ballot measures. 12 of them are advisory votes. I will be talking about that in a minute, about our legislative priorities in the future. And 13 local measures from a variety of cities and school districts, and then there'll be 324 offices on the ballot. So lots and lots of folks to vote for. We have not actually built ballots yet. We'll be doing that next week, but a fact that I love, and it blows me away our staff can handle this level of detail. We build ballots in-house, and we will have probably over 400 different ballot styles or different combinations, because there are so many unique combinations of districts. And then they build all of those, and then they build them in 4 more languages. So they are building lots and lots of ballot styles, and they are 100% accurate. It actually blows me away every single election.
So is it a law or somehow a regulation that there has to be a voter's pamphlet mailed out to every voter?
That's a great question. I believe for state, not for state, let me try this again. For general elections, yes, voters' pamphlets go out to every voter. In King County, in King County Code, we're also required to do a primary local voters pamphlet. So many counties, I think there's only 3 across the state who actually mail a voters pamphlet for primary elections, but we do. The other thing that confuses people a lot, and I don't know how to solve this problem, but is on my list of things to try to figure out, is I know it's confusing to get both a state and a local pamphlet. I would love to be able to combine those. So that's something that we need to work with the Secretary of State's office on, but it's tough. I thought I know we're about out of time, but I thought I'd just touch on a couple things for legislative, because we're talking about new laws. I thought I'd just mention some of the things we are actually already preparing for the next session Olympia that will start in January. A couple things that I thought you all might be interested in, that we are interested in. One is simple ballot language. One thing we hear from voters a lot is this legalese that ballot measures are written on is very confusing. I don't know what yes even means or approved even means. We don't have a great idea on this, but there are some states that have experimented with it. One of my staff was just looking at data from Alaska where they actually use, I think it's called the flesh reading ease level, that thing that you can do in your Word document to tell you how complicated it is. I think the example he gave is, I think the higher it is, the easier it is to read. And he said that Dr. Seuss was like 120, right? And then he said the Harvard Law Review was like, I don't know, maybe in the high 30s. And some of the ballot measures we had, like one of our public hospital district measures was below that. And that is concerning. So I don't know if that's the right approach, but it's something that we're thinking about, because we definitely hear from voters that they're like, I don't know what this means, which is totally fair. Another thing we're thinking a lot about is signature alternatives. We don't have a good answer to this one. Signature alternatives. We don't have a good answer, but we certainly know that society is starting to move away from signatures. You're seeing people more use pins, use codes, do electronic signatures. There's not a great solution, but I think in our perspective, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have to figure out what that probably looks like. So we want to make sure that we are getting ahead of that and being part of that conversation. So it's just something we're thinking about. A good thing to do often is to pilot that. For our overseas and service voters is a great place to kind of start things, to try new things. So, and there's not a lot of great models out there for people trying different things. So we're doing some research on that one. We talked about advisory votes already. There was an amazing bill last session that got farther than I thought it would in Olympia, sponsored by Senator Patty Cooterer to get rid of advisory votes. It actually passed out of the Senate and got into the House. We love that bill. Our hope is that with 12 advisory votes on this ballot, it might actually pass this year. Our perspective is that it's confusing to voters. We get lots of calls from people saying, what is this? What am I actually voting on? It takes up valuable ballot space. It goes first. Like, we are going to have county council members who are on the back of the ballot this fall. So we would like to, have more important things up top, and then, it doesn't really have a real impact. That's what really confuses voters, is that it's not really a binding thing like most ballot measures are. You're just weighing in on something the legislature did retrospectively. And then finally, this is what I mentioned earlier as well, another bill sponsored by Patty Cooterer, who is on the state government committee down in Olympia, is to reinstate voting rights for those on community custody. These are the folks who are not in jail for a felony conviction, but who are out of jail, but still under supervision of the Department of Corrections. We would like to see that line much more clear. If you are standing in front of me and you are not in jail, we would like you to be able to register and to vote. One, because we think it's the right thing to do, and two, because I think it's a lot easier to communicate for folks like you and our other partners on the ground. And I'm sorry, there was one more. The May primary. So I don't know how you all feel about this, but we feel like August is not a great time for a primary election. People are on vacation. They are enjoying summer. There was a bill sponsored by Senator Hunt last session that got a lot of conversation around moving the primary to May. We like that. We think that is consistent with a lot of other states in our region, which is great for messaging, and we think it'll hopefully give more people a chance to participate. So we're really excited about that one as well. Those were all my things. More questions?
What is the current status of the citizenship question?
On the census? Yeah, so again, I don't know if this is my area of expertise, but the census is, my understanding is that it will be on the census. It will not be on, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. It will not, it was like the outcome I wanted. No. So it will not be on the census. Yeah. And we actually will be including in the voters pamphlet that goes out to you all some information about the census, because that's something King County is really committed to, and every department is kind of trying to do their part to get the word out. Yeah, let me be very clear. It will not be on the census.
I don't know how important this question is, but the people who, well, I always just assumed that if somebody was a student for 4 years or whatever, even 2 years in some other place, that they would just register where they are. And I always thought that students did that because I used to live in Minnesota.
Sure.
And there was a lot of stuff like that in Minnesota, but maybe they were just from a different part of Minnesota. But if a person does go to another state, I thought a student or anybody going to another state for a few years would register there.
They certainly can, and we see students do both. So we have lots of students on our voter rolls who get their ballot mailed to wherever they are at school if they don't feel like that's going to be their permanent home or don't feel like that's their residence or that's what they prefer to do. And then we have a lot of students who register here. Not as many as we would like in some cases, but certainly we see a lot of students register in Washington as well. The Washington Bus in particular and other organizations spend a lot of time in our community colleges and even on the UW getting folks registered. So we see people do both.
So I'm wondering if you're weighing in on, right now at different campaigns, we do phone banks.
Mm-hmm.
And now folks, they put their cell phone, there are no landlines, and of course folks, well, if you're like me, I don't answer my phone if I don't recognize the number.
Yeah.
So, and it's, trying to think, well, how now are campaigns going to be doing things other than the door-to-door, which takes a lot of volunteers. So any thoughts or any conversations on that?
No, I think it's a great question. I think what we are seeing campaigns do is switch to texting more than anything else. So I will say, I won't weigh in either way, and that's a good thing or a bad thing. I will say, generally speaking, campaigns who want to get out the vote and campaigns who do signature chasing, we certainly encourage that. Anyone who can get their signature, challenge resolved, we are all about that, so that's great. But we do also get quite a few calls from people recently with the advent of campaigns using a lot of text messaging of people who are very frustrated with that. And there's a lot of confusion. So a lot of people do not realize your voter registration information is public information, but only some of it. So, when, your date of birth, your registration address, that, whether or not you voted is public information. Your phone number, your email, we will never give to anybody. So I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and a lot of campaigns, for better or worse, tell people that they got that information from us. They definitely did not. They're getting that from other sources. There's lots of them available. So I don't know. I don't know if it's good or bad, but I will tell you we've certainly got a lot of questions about it, of how did they get my cell phone number? Why are they texting me? What's going on?
My question was back on, do you have to register to vote where you're living? And I have had people who I asked if they wanted to register who have told me, no, I want to stay registered in Florida because there my vote makes a difference.
Yeah. There's I've heard that too. There is not a law that says you have to register where you are living. In Washington State, the law is that if you have lived here for 30 days and are, a permanent resident of Washington State or consider yourself as such, there's a declaration that I'm sure you all have seen on the registration form, then you are eligible to register to vote here. There's actually not a law against being registered in 2 states also, which I think surprises people. You certainly cannot vote in 2 states, but in terms of keeping voter rolls clean, we spend a lot of time trying to get our voter rolls clean and make sure that, we send notifications to other states. When people register with us and say they moved from another state, we let them know that, and most of them do the same for us. There's a great program called the ERIC. It's the Electronic Registration Information Center. I believe there are now maybe 29 states participating that do data sharing of their voter registration rolls to try to keep them clean, but there are absolutely people registered in more than 1 state also.
Earlier in your talk, you had said that there was a consideration for a new legislation that would allow felons, when they're no longer under the DOC control, to be enfranchised. Was that about 10,000 people?
It's about 10,000. Our estimate is about 10,000 people in Washington State would be enfranchised as a result of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And so what you had just said, the the information is shared, for voter information is shared across approximately, what, 29
29 states participate in that program. We do send information back and forth to all states. We'll let them know if somebody registers here.
Was that information considered underneath the audits, that the security audits, either federal or state?
That's a great question. So for our audits, they're looking more at penetration testing of our voter rolls. Is really what they were doing, is if somebody was trying to hack in, like we saw a lot of attempts in 2016, of if somebody could get into our system to change things. You know, I don't know about the federal level whether anyone's looking at that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
How many voters in King County voted twice last time?
None voted twice. I can tell you that affirmatively. Our team reconciles every single night. Every single ballot that gets scanned in, the second it gets scanned in, when it gets to us, it says that voter voted, do not accept another ballot from them. So, yeah, I can be 100% confident in that. Good question.
It sounds like you're...
We'll go there. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a lot of things right, and I just came from a state that's not doing much right. I wonder how much cross-communication there is between your offices, state voting offices, and comparison, because it seems to me like you guys could teach a class.
Well, thank you for that. You know, we are lucky to have a lot of, we've got, I think, 4 or 5 on our staff who are nationally certified election administrators. So they do attend conferences across the country and meet with other elected officials and auditors and election officials. So they are doing some of that information sharing. The other thing I would say is we get a lot of people coming to visit us. So we actually have, I think, Honolulu coming on Monday. But for a lot of states that are considering going to vote by mail, they are often coming to our operation to kind of see what that looks like, what the transition is when you're standing it up from nothing. What are the kind of things that you're thinking about? So we actually do get tons of visitors across the country coming to see our operation, and we're always happy to share that information.
What sort of information do you have about the hacking in Washington State? What was your evidence, et cetera?
Great question. So our understanding is that it really took place at the state level, which is where most of the attempts, I think, took place in states. So it was at that Secretary of State's office. So in Washington, the Secretary of State's office keeps the official voter rolls for all of the state, all 39 counties. We also keep a set, but those talk back and forth. We're actually all on the same system now. So, that is kind of one and the same. So the understanding is from the Department of Homeland Security and others that there were efforts in 2016 to hack into that system that were unsuccessful. And all I know is that that's what they told me. The other thing I would say, just as a quick shout out to our senator, to the previous question, is we actually did meet with Senator Patty Murray just this past week on Tuesday, who was really interested if we had suggestions. She invited us and a number of other partners that she works with to talk about if they had suggestions for things to be done at the federal level. And I was really excited to have her holding that conversation, wanting to know, are there minimum standards that they should be thinking about for every state? And recognizing that probably not every state is going to go to vote by mail, even though we think it's the best. Even just a permanent absentee ballot. There's a lot of states where you have to provide like a note from a doctor or some sort of excuse every single time to get your ballot, which is ridiculous. So we had kind of a conversation around things like that of, maybe it's either mandatory or incentivized participation in things like that ERIC electronic records sharing system, or maybe it's, again, permanent absentee ballot. So I was really excited to see her wanting to have that conversation and thinking about, are there things that the federal government could be doing to really bring everyone up to at least a minimum level?
What are sort of your 3 things we should all definitely take away?
Oh, great question. One, I know you all are going to vote, so make sure you tell 5 people who you don't think will vote to vote in this November election. It is critically important. Our local races are really the ones that are the tightest. We had a Seattle City Council race in 2015, decided by, I think, 26 votes comes to mind. I can't remember the exact number. So these things get really tight. This is the year where your vote really, really matters. So encourage your friends and neighbors and strangers to vote, as I know you all will do. Two would be, I know some of you have taken a tour, but if you ever do want to take a tour, it is a great opportunity. We are more than happy to tour you around the ballot processing facility. Closer to election day is best, so that kind of last week or two of August or that first week of November is great. We are happy to accommodate that anytime you want to come down to Renton to watch ballots being counted. And I don't think I have a third one. Just thank you guys for the work that you're doing and for being engaged and providing candidate forums and resources to everybody. Right. Oh.
Do you need any volunteers?
Last question is, do we need any volunteers? We don't. We always need temporary staff, but we don't employ a lot of volunteers right now. But thank you for asking. We may in the future, depending on how many drop boxes we end up with. Are you up? I don't know what happens now. Thank you all.
Thank you again so much to Kendall. Please give her another hand. We really appreciate you all coming. Please, again, keep an eye out in the email newsletter and the voter. We'll have another forum next month, October 3rd, on juvenile justice. And again, keep an eye out for ballots and baristas. I believe that Kendall has left us a few printed copies of this slideshow if you would like to take one. We've got buttons in the back, and just thank you again.